Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Kill, and today I'm reviewing Now or Never from Red Raven Games. Now or Never, designed by Ryan Lockhart, is, well, an adventure. It's effectively a worker placement game with a story mode and a bit of an adventure, and a very adventure-y. This game is... It's an adventure game. It's an adventure game which you're going to be wandering around the board across 6 rounds of play, trying to take your actions, trying to wander from location to location, every turn alternating, not necessarily alternating, choosing between activating your various assistants in the game. You're going to have these assistants you have in the game that you can activate, you can build up, and we have one player's area over here, the main player board over here, and the main storyboard you'll be wandering around with over here. Like I said already, you'll be taking one of 2 core actions on your turn, either activating an assistant, like I showed you already, activating one of your own assistants, flipping them over, and paying the cost shown in them to take the benefit on them. Alternatively, resting an assistant. Every assistant you own can be rested for just without paying the cost, but getting 2 health or 1 money. Or alternatively, activating an opponent's assistant, paying them the cost, and they'll also get a tax from that as well. So depending on the assistant, for example, over here, this assistant costs 5 to activate, and I would get 3 tax if they were activated by an opponent, and that money would go to me. That's one of the core actions you can do in the game. The other core action you can do is by activating your adventure. You're going to have these options over here, where we have these over here, where you can take these, any one of your movement actions, where you slide this over, and you move that amount, possibly modified by abilities, and you move your adventure around the main board onto various spots to either go ahead and hunt down these exploration tokens, to interact with and fight monsters, or to go to any number of different locations across the board, taking the location action. Along the way, you'll have the opportunity to cash in quests, as whenever you go to specific locations. Specific quests have different interaction points on them, different places you can go. You can go to the Forest of Faces and trade in 2 books to get this ongoing tableau benefit, improving your own character's abilities as you go through the game. So basically, that's the core action sequence you're going through. Across 6 rounds of play, you're going to be taking actions with your assistants. You're going to be taking actions by just wandering around your board and activating those locations and cashing in quests. And the entire point and reason you're trying to do these things, how do you actually win the game? Well, points primarily, but points are going to come from a few different main areas. The first area you're going to get points in the game is by building up your production engine in the game. Over here on this board, you're going to be constantly trying to build up your production, both through the buildings you're actually going to buy and place onto your board, from the various people you're going to be placing in those buildings, as well as from these little exploration tokens you gather along the way. All of those are going to improve and generate more production in the game, and at the end of the game, you're going to get rid of everything you have. You can get rid of all your resources, all your coins. You're going to go through one final production round, trade in anything you produce over here at the market. These are anytime actions. At any time during the game, you can go ahead and trade in different resources for those coins, which are going to be incredibly important because you will need a lot of coins to go ahead and build all the buildings you want to build. And so at the end of the game, you'll go through a final production, convert it all to coins, and get that many points. That's going to be one giant section of points you get throughout the game. Additionally, you're going to get points for how you built out your board. Over here on this board, you're going to get points for having full rows of buildings, as well as for having a variety of different types of assistants, having all different types of assistants in each rows, and you can get giant chunks of points for that. But then additionally, you'll get points from some of your buildings and the way they score off of other buildings in the game. And then from there, you'll also get points. You'll also get points for getting, where am I over here? For the various quests you go ahead. You get points for the various quests you cash in, as well as some of these tokens you sell. You'll be getting points for all of those throughout the course of the game. So a lot of things happening here, a lot of stuff you're doing. You're wandering around the board. You're going to be moving around on this location over here, trying to move around, take different actions. You're going to be going ahead and gathering in additionally points from all the buildings you're going to be getting. You get points from everything the way it scores. You're going to be trying to build out an effective production engine, and you're doing all this while jumping back and forth between taking worker placement actions around the board. It's kind of worker placement because what you effectively do is you have a speed you can move, and then you're going to different locations. So it's not pure worker placement, but it's worker placement with a degree of being mindful of your movement and how other areas of the board are going to affect and modify that movement, and then trying to score as efficiently as possible in Now or Never. Hopefully that was mostly covered. Let's just cover one last thing before we go into the actual... Well, let's cover 2 more things before we go into the opinion of the game, into the review. One of those things is going to be the quest cards, which we've lightly touched upon. The game's going to have 3 piles of quest cards you can draw from. One of them are a little bit lower cost, but a little bit lower benefit. Just ways of getting an extra few points here or there. You're going to want to get a lot of those because the other ones are more expensive and you just won't have enough books to cash in to get all the other ones. But from the other 2 piles of quests, you're going to have tableau focused quests, things that reward and improve your tableau, extra movement, more actions, more ways to convert mana into other things in the game, whether health or resources or things like that. And then the last pile of cards you have are going to be endgame points, which will effectively reward you with larger chunks of points, but with specific ways of how you have to get those points. And those quests are going to be something you're going to be heavily mindful of as you try to wander around this world. And secondly, is going to be the encounters with monsters. When you try to tackle a monster, effectively what you're doing over here is you're going to engage with the monster, you're going to wander to their spot, and then you're going to start a combat sequence where you give them a little bit of a health card to represent their health, in this case 8, we're going to put that 8 over there, and then you're going to go ahead and start basically going back and forth through combat rounds, rolling a die to activate one of your abilities. So we're going to grab this die over here, we're going to roll it, the monster is going to deal 3 damage to us at the same time as we activated ability number 4, which means I can look at my scaled sword over here, and I can do 8 damage to it. Wow, that was a solid roll against this monster. That was a 1-hit defeat over there. That monster is going to take 8 damage off the bat from our scaled sword, and it's going to deal 3 damage back to us, which we'll track on our health track over here. A more common combat is going to be you taking on monsters that are actually represent a challenge and give you enough reward comparable to that monster, and generally involve several rounds of combat back and forth. So for example, this monster over here, that same basic idea, had we done 8 damage to it, it done 6 damage to us, we still have to go through multiple rounds of combat trying to survive, trying to use our various abilities to mitigate that damage, abilities you'll pick up from this core market board over here, or from your own ability stacks. You're going to have the opportunity to gain experience throughout the course of the game, and you'll use that experience to go ahead and try to get additional abilities that will either give you different navigational abilities, different combat-based abilities, as well as you having the gear store over here, which gives you more abilities you can slot in, again, giving you different ways to improve your defense or attack in this game as you try to find your own unique pathway forward in Now or Never. Which finally brings us to the review, starting off the bat with, well, ease of play. This is a 1 to 4 player game that generally takes 2 to 3 hours to play. We'll have a caveat about that as there are official variants to this game, official variants from Ryan Lockhart. We'll talk about those in the final thoughts. But generally, before you dive into variants, you're talking about a 2 to 3 hour game, 1 to 4 players. Generally, I found this game plays best at 2. I have not played the solo mode, but I find 2 gives you pretty much the full experience I want out of the game without a full other player, a third, or even a fourth player adding further to the playtime. So I've enjoyed this game very much at 2 players. As far as ease of play, rulebook is very clear to dive into. Overall, very easy. Like, I mean, the whole thing is, it's basically you're taking 1 of 2 actions on your turn. You're either taking an assistant action or you're taking a worker placement action, which is moving around the board, activating a location. From there, you kind of have to explain what the locations do, as well as going through a round or 2 of combat. We haven't touched upon the fact that there is a story mode to this game. Giant six books full of different campaigns as you go through a story option, a different way of engaging with the experience, as well as a whole different side to the board. So there's a few ways to engage in this game. We'll talk briefly about those as we go through things, which I guess is a good time to dive directly into what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking. Starting off the bat with what I like, which is there's a lot of pathways towards victory in this game. There are a ton of areas to focus your engine on the game, whether you're focusing heavily on quests. You can get a ton of points for quests if you dive heavily that direction, but that also requires building up your resources and trying to focus there and potentially giving up other interactions because you're constantly going to specific locations. All the quests have specific locations where you cache them in, and so you might have a little less freedom of how you want to build up your engine because you're constantly chasing those extra points and possibly that extra degree of tableau building throughout the course of the game. You can also go ahead and hunt down monsters. Build up your gear and build up your experience and become the best possible monster hunter in the game and focus your energies and attentions that direction. That will help improve your tableau because you're constantly beginning grabbing these workers, but you also need to make sure to be balancing the fact that you need to get buildings because a lot of the monsters give you workers, and if you don't have buildings to place them in, that's not really going to help you out, so you have to juggle and balance that. Speaking of which, another pathway you can pursue is just heavily focusing on the buildings. If you really put your time, effort, and attention into those 6 rounds of play, you can get all your buildings built in this game. It is hard, it is a lot, but you can get all of your buildings built, all 16. You can't actually build all your buildings. There's more buildings than there are building spots, but you can fill out your actual board over here, getting a ton of extra points, especially if you fill them up with workers. Lots of pathways and opportunities for what you do in this game, where you focus your energies and attentions, and you can mix and match those as well, trying different strategies at the same time. And those quest cards give you one of the many fun tableau building aspects to the game because there are a lot of fun tableau building aspects. The quest cards will give you extra actions. My favorite cards are the extra actions they'll give you, favorite card, singular, but you're also going to have other ways to build up your tableau from the various gear and the experience you have from these items, from the various assistants you're going to gather through the course of the game. You'll start with two primary ones, but you have the opportunity to add more as well as upgrade the ones you have, as well as just building out your buildings, which will give you both in-game production, in-game engine, as well as points for the end game. There's a lot of things you're trying to do in the game that will give you all those extra points, different ways to focus on things that just are incredibly rewarding in terms of what they're doing in the game. So there's just a lot of tableau building, a lot of options for how you go ahead and try to pursue your engine, and that's before we even get to the asymmetric characters. The asymmetric characters in the game is going to be 4 different asymmetric characters, each with different stats, abilities, gear, and options for their upgrades and experience. There's going to be also options for the different sides of the board and different ways to engage with the game, as well as the story mode aspect. The story mode, which for me is not my preferred way to play, we'll talk about that, but effectively effectively, the story mode gives you whole just books full of story in the game, different interactions. You could do this solo, but if you're playing with other players, you effectively have people go ahead and read a text to you. Hunt down and spy the monster. Skill 7. No, wait, that's I'm sorry, I didn't read from the start of a paragraph over there. Let's go over here. The grass is dewy, the rock shining in the clear sunrise. You follow the scent of smoke to a camp of fishfolk just rising for their morning meal. One of those creatures came through here during the night, tore up the camp, says one of the fishfolk. Even stepped in the flower pots I planted for my darling Heloise, he signs. Looks like she doesn't mind, says another fishfolk camper, nodding at the packbird nibbling the smashed blossoms. Do you help the fishfolk florist repair the flower pots? Or do you hunt down and spy on the monster? And so you're going to give players the opportunities to choose these options without them knowing what consequences will go, giving them a degree of immersion into the game state. Basically, the experience tokens you'd otherwise hunt down the game can instead turn into an actual degree of interaction, of story, of success and losses as you try to pursue different pathways, bringing an extra degree of immersion to the game, but also slowing down the game, which is why I don't love these quite as much. The story is engaging. I have not played through the full 6-game campaign of this, but the story gives a, not engaging, engaging is the wrong word. The story brings an extra level of this world being alive around you, bringing a little bit more of immersion to this, well, what's happening on the table over here. But again, it gives you another way to play and more ways to engage with the experience, especially if you're finding yourself finding the core gameplay a little similar, a little same each time. This definitely gives you a way to mix it up and to go through a bit of a narrative progression of the experience. As far as what I don't like in the game, the first thing, and this is addressed through variants, by the way, I have not played the variants, but this is addressed through the shortened game variants, is the first few rounds of play generally feel fairly similar game to game. This is one of those things where one of the things I tend to do when I'm putting out reviews or I'm doing a video like this is I tend to hop onto Board Game Geek, check out other pros and cons, see if there's anything that I missed that resonates with me. I'm like, oh, what about this, what about that? And that's where I saw a bit of a note after writing down this little aspect of how the first few rounds of Near and Far generally feel Near and Now or Never. Near and Far is a different game. The first few rounds of Now and Never, to me, have generally felt fairly similar game to game, and while the first game is great and the second game is great, by the time you get that third game, you're starting to go through that same loop, and it feels like I almost wish I could skip and fast forward past those first 2 rounds. Funnily enough, I found out that before filming this, that there are ways to skip forward past those few rounds. This is a 6-round game, and Ryan Laukat has put out official variants for the game that give you a 4 or a 5-round experience with some of those early game stuff kind of pre-handed to you to make that first few rounds feel a little less similar, so you can dive into a shortened experience that is more diversified in what it's doing because part of your engine is already built for you. So one of my cons is very potentially addressed. I just haven't tried those variants out. So if you played this game and if you have the same complaint, well, they've already addressed it. Possibly, probably. I haven't played it, but so you know. Past that, the endgame scores can sometimes be make or break on those final combats. What I mean by that is this game does have a degree of luck as you navigate through combats. As you roll those dice and as you try to take into account how a combat will play, which of your abilities will be activated, especially if you only have some of your abilities upgraded, having those abilities be activated in any round of combat is absolutely key, which means there's been more than a few times where I've gotten to the end game here, and then I lose 2 combats in a row, or the other person loses 2 combats in a row, and the end game ends up being make or break. You get those final few points of those extra workers I would have added, would have given you an extra 10 points in the game. It can absolutely come down to the luck of the roll on those final combats, which, while it's always possible, it tends to be more noticeable when you're in those final end game states and you're calculating your last 3 moves, and then 3 of those moves, or 2 of those 3 moves, just fail on you. That can really feel like it came down to the luck of the draw on the final endgame state. And then lastly, setup and tear down in this game are not insignificant at all. In fact, to the point that I don't often comment on setup and tear down as a con for me, but in Now or Never, I feel it's prevalent enough that I would comment that setup and tear down for this game are a beast. An absolute beast. It's a little better once you have everyone who knows the game, but it's still a beast. This game is a lot to set up and tear down, and it's one of the biggest things that always makes me a bit reluctant to pull it out. It's not the kind of game I pull out when people are over. It's the kind of game I pull out when I know people are coming, and I'm prepared to set up well in advance of them showing up. It's a lot. It's not crazy a lot, but it's certainly a lot. As far as what I can see others not liking, first of all, I kind of touched upon this already with the endgame stuff, but the randomness of combat is certainly prevalent across the board, and then more so as well, the building setup. One thing I didn't really touch upon over here, just not enough space to show you everything, but one thing I didn't really touch upon is the buildings. these buildings you're going to be building on your board, the way they're set up and structured is you have your own little 5x4 grid that's randomly set up as far as the way the buildings are set up and the way you kind of have access to those buildings, building from the outside in and choosing a pathway as far as how they're going to be built. And sometimes the buildings work out nicely in terms of the production, and you have that discount of a -1 on building cost, and that feeds nicely into the production of other buildings, and sometimes it works out beautifully. Other times that pathway is a little harder to figure out, or just not quite as favorable. It gives you its own little puzzle as you start figuring out how do you want to build out your structures and pathways, because you have to choose one, and then you're committed to that, building from that point outwards. So it gives you a sense of puzzle as you try to figure it out, but that puzzle is not always equally favorable. And then secondly, I'll say the game is very cash starved early on. You're gonna start thinking with a chunk of coins. You'll use those coins, but from there you're gonna start to feel very cash starved early on as you try to figure out how to get your production engine up and running. Now that does work out nicely in the second half of the game, but the first few rounds of the game, you go from look what I can do in that first round into nothing. The answer is nothing is what I can do in that second or third round as you start to try to get your money and your chains and your production engines back in queue. So the first few rounds could feel a little tight as you build up your engines. Again, possibly adjusted for in those variants, which I have not played. As far as final thoughts on Now or Never, I really enjoyed this one. This is a very solid game that I've really appreciated what the game is doing and how it's doing it, giving you an adventure feel while ultimately being mostly just a pure Euro, but a pure Euro with other things going on, with a degree of questing, with a degree of interaction, a degree of story, a degree of pathway, a little bit of RPG elements to it. This game manages to feel incredibly Euro while also feeling like an upgraded Talisman or Runebound, or it kind of has both of those worlds hybrided into a single experience while also giving you a narrative option for those who want that as well. This is really well done while feeling both similar and different at the same time, with just a lot of things gelling together in different ways. And I'm very excited for those variants. My biggest potential complaint about this, not biggest complaint, but one of the complaints I have is going to be both the game length as well as the fact that the early rounds feel similar. And for me, I absolutely plan on diving into this game with those shorter variants the next time, which the bad news is it won't help that play time to setup and tear down ratio. That's the only part I'm a little hesitant on. Maybe this game becomes an hour-and-a-half game, but the setup and tear down are the same, which isn't my favorite aspect, but I am excited to dive into those variants and see how they adjust or improve the experience for me. Overall, Now or Never is compelling. It's the kind of experience that I really enjoy. I don't know exactly where this holds up a year from now, 2 years from now. I don't know where this game is, but overall, I like the tableau building. I like the asymmetric characters. I like the sense of adventure. I like the tightness and the multiple pathways towards victory this game gives you. There's a lot going on here that overall really works well for me. For me, this is a 4 out of 5. I've really enjoyed the experience so far, and I'm excited to dive into the variants of the experience to see what this shorter game does for me. As far as other game recommendations, first of all, if you're looking for something else that leans more heavily into the narrative and abandons a bit of the mechanics, Sleeping Gods from Red Raven Games is another excellent experience that is worth checking into. They'll have the similar degree of, well, everything you see here, but with a whole lot more focus on the world building. And if you're looking for something that kind of manages to feel fairly similar to me, Dead Reckoning actually gives me very similar vibes to Now or Never. Dead Reckoning, the pirate, the shipbuilder, merchant, and pirate kind of game from AEG. That one gives me a very similar vibe as far as the kind of sense of exploration, having your lone piece explore the world and interact with things in a variety of ways while building up a tableau, while having a degree of fighting, but also not being that heavily focused on fighting. Overall, I got very similar vibes from both Dead Reckoning and from Now or Never. In any case, and until next time, I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and I hope you have a good one.